The Great Hall of the Galactic Council stretched out like a massive bowl made of crystal and metal. 47 different alien species sat in their assigned seats, all looking down at the center, where a single human woman stood alone. The lights above cast long shadows across the floor, making the scene look like a trial from ancient times. Ambassador Sarah Chen kept her back straight and her hands behind her back. She wore the dark blue uniform of Earth's diplomatic corps, but the gold stripes on her shoulders seemed dull under the harsh lights. Around her, hundreds of alien eyes stared with mixtures of fear, disgust, and cold judgment. The charges against humanity had been read aloud 3 times in different galactic languages. Each reading made them sound worse. Excessive violence, environmental destruction, creation of dangerous artificial intelligence, breaking the most sacred laws of the galactic community. High Arbiter Zekthal rose from his seat high above the others. He was a Yorthian, tall and thin like a walking stick covered in gray skin. His forearms moved in ritual patterns as he spoke, and his voice echoed through hidden speakers in the walls. "The evidence before this council is clear and undeniable," Zekthal said, his words falling like hammer blows. "The species calling themselves human has violated every principle we hold sacred. They wage war against their own kind. They have driven countless species on their world to extinction. And now, they create artificial minds without the proper safeguards required by galactic law." Sarah felt the weight of every stare pressing down on her. She had known this day would come. Earth's application to join the Galactic Council had been a mistake from the beginning. Humanity was too young, too violent, too unpredictable for the older races to accept. "The humans ask us to overlook their past," continued Zekthal, his voice growing louder. "They promise to change, to learn, to become better. But their own history shows us the truth. War after war, death after death. And now they play with forces that could destroy us all." The alien delegates murmured their agreement. Sarah could hear the translation devices turning their words into human speech, but the meaning was clear in any language. They were afraid of her people, and fear made them cruel. "We have reviewed the evidence from Earth's own historical records," said another voice. This came from Representative Kell of the Andorian Collective, a creature that looked like a cross between a spider and a flower. "Humans have fought 14,000 documented wars in the last 5,000 years. They have created weapons capable of destroying their entire world, and yet they ask us to trust them with the secrets of galactic civilization." Sarah wanted to speak, to defend her people, but she had already given her testimony. The council had listened with closed minds and harder hearts. They had decided humanity's fate before she ever entered this room. The vote came quickly. One by one, each species cast their judgment. The results appeared as lights on the great board above: red for guilty, blue for innocent. Sarah watched as red light after red light appeared. 42 red lights, 3 blue lights, 2 abstentions. Zekthal stood again, and silence fell over the hall like a heavy blanket. "By the power granted to this council by the Galactic Charter, we hereby find the human species guilty of all charges brought before us. The sentence is immediate expulsion from the Galactic Council and all associated treaties. All trade agreements with human worlds are canceled. Earth's solar system will be placed under quarantine, effective immediately." The words hit Sarah like physical blows. Quarantine meant isolation, no trade, no communication, no help from anyone in the galaxy. Humanity would be alone among the stars, cut off from all the knowledge and friendship they had hoped to find. Furthermore, Zekthal continued, "No species represented in this council may provide aid, technology, or safe passage to any human vessel found outside their quarantine zone. Any violation of this order will result in similar punishment." Sarah finally found her voice. It came out steady and clear, carrying to every corner of the great hall. "The Council has made its decision," she said, looking up at the assembled aliens who had just condemned her entire species. "Humanity will remember who stood with us in our darkest hour." She paused, her eyes moving from face to face, memorizing each one. And who didn't? Some of the aliens shifted uncomfortably in their seats. A few looked away, but most stared back with cold satisfaction, confident they had made the right choice. Sarah reached into her jacket and pulled out a small communication device. She pressed a single button and spoke one word: "Prometheus." The device went dark, but Sarah smiled. It was a small smile, barely visible, but somehow it made several of the watching aliens feel suddenly uneasy. They didn't understand what the word meant, but something in Sarah's voice when she said it made their skin crawl. "The human delegation has 5 standard hours to leave council space," announced Zekthal. "After that time, any human vessel will be considered in violation of quarantine and will be destroyed without warning." Sarah nodded once, then turned and walked toward the exit. Her footsteps echoed in the silent hall, each one seeming to mark the end of something important. Behind her, the alien delegates began to talk among themselves, their voices mixing into a buzz of satisfaction and relief. They watched Sarah leave, and many of them felt they were watching the end of the human problem. The violent, unpredictable species would be trapped in their own system, unable to threaten anyone else ever again. In time, they would probably destroy themselves, as violent species always did. But as Sarah reached the great doors of the council chamber, she turned back one last time. Her voice carried clearly across the vast space, despite the growing chatter of the delegates. "You think you're saving the galaxy from us?" she said. "But you're actually saving us from you. Someday, you'll understand the difference." The doors closed behind her with a sound like thunder, and Sarah Chen was gone. The council delegates continued their discussions, planning how to divide up the trade routes that humanity had once used, talking about the new colonies they could establish in the empty space around human territory. None of them noticed that Sarah's communication device had not been sending a message to Earth. The signal had gone somewhere else entirely, to coordinates that didn't appear on any galactic chart. And the word Prometheus was not a surrender or a cry for help. It was a code word that meant the real plan could finally begin. Within hours, massive energy barriers appeared around Earth's solar system, sealing it off from the rest of the galaxy. The quarantine was complete. The Council's monitoring stations confirmed that no signals were getting in or out. Humanity was alone. The alien delegates went back to their home worlds feeling proud of themselves. They had removed a dangerous element from galactic society. They had made the galaxy a safer, more peaceful place. They had no idea they had just made the worst mistake in galactic history, and they wouldn't realize it until it was far too late to fix. 3 years passed like a peaceful dream for the Galactic Council. Without the humans to worry about, trade between the alien worlds grew stronger than ever before. Wars became rare. Conflicts that had raged for decades suddenly found peaceful solutions. The galaxy seemed to breathe easier without the violent human influence. The quarantine barriers around Earth's solar system worked perfectly. The energy walls were invisible but stronger than any material known to galactic science. Nothing could get in or out. No ships, no messages, no signals of any kind. It was as if the human solar system had been erased from the universe. High. Arbiter Zekthal often looked at the reports from the monitoring stations placed around the quarantine zone. The readings were always the same: minimal activity, low energy output, no attempts to break through the barriers. The humans seemed to have accepted their fate quietly. "They're probably dying off slowly," Zekthal told his advisors during one of their weekly meetings. "Cut off from galactic trade and technology, they can't support their large population. In another 50 years, the problem will solve itself." The other council members agreed. Dr. Veltar, A scientist from the Centauri Collective had even published a paper predicting humanity's extinction timeline. According to his calculations, the human population would drop by half within 10 years and disappear completely within a century. It's actually merciful, Dr. Veltar explained to anyone who would listen. A quick death from resource depletion is better than the slow corruption they would have brought to galactic civilization. But not everyone was so confident. Intelligence Director Vashati of the Centauri Collective spent her days studying the data from the quarantine zone, and something bothered her. The humans were too quiet, too calm, too accepting of their punishment. "This doesn't match their psychological profile," she told her staff during a briefing. "Humans are known for being stubborn and resourceful. They never give up without a fight. Yet we're seeing no attempts to break the quarantine, no desperate messages, no signs of panic or rebellion." Her subordinates looked at her with confusion. "Isn't that good news?" asked one young analyst. "Maybe they've finally learned their lesson." Vashati shook her head. "You don't understand humans. They don't learn lessons like that. They adapt, they fight, they find new ways to survive. This silence is unnatural." She submitted report after report to the council, requesting permission to send investigation probes closer to the barrier. Each time, her requests were denied. The council didn't want to waste resources on a dying species. They were too busy enjoying their new peaceful galaxy. Meanwhile, at the edge of the quarantine zone, strange things began to happen. Captain Mortek of the Yorthian Border Patrol was the first to notice the gravitational anomalies. His sensors picked up readings that didn't make sense. Massive construction projects inside the barrier that seemed far too large for human technology. "It has to be sensor errors," his science officer explained. "The quarantine field is probably interfering with our instruments. There's no way the humans could be building anything that big." But the readings kept coming. Energy signatures that spiked far beyond anything Earth had ever produced. Construction patterns that suggested projects spanning millions of kilometers. Materials that appeared to bend the laws of physics in impossible ways. The reports were filed and promptly buried in bureaucratic channels. No one wanted to suggest that the quarantine might not be working as planned. The smugglers and pirates who operated in the outer rim systems began to whisper about other strange events. Ships that tried to sneak through the barrier simply disappeared. Not destroyed. There were no explosion signatures or debris fields. They just vanished, as if they had never existed. Captain Rithak the Red, the most notorious pirate in 3 sectors, lost 4 of his best crews trying to breach the quarantine. Each time, he watched their ships approach the barrier, and then nothing. No final transmissions, no sensor readings, no trace left behind. "It's like the barrier eats them," he told his remaining crews. "I've seen a lot of weapons in my time, but I've never seen anything that can make a ship just stop existing." Word spread through the criminal underground, "Stay away from the human quarantine zone." Something unnatural was happening there, and it was hungry. But these stories never reached the council chambers. Pirates and smugglers didn't file official reports, and the Border Patrol officers who witnessed the disappearances were told to focus on their regular duties. The Yorthian hegemony, feeling confident and secure, even began expanding into systems near the quarantine zone. Why waste valuable real estate just because humans used to live nearby? The quarantine would keep them trapped forever. Admiral Ketharal led the expansion fleets himself, establishing 3 new military outposts pointing their weapons toward the barrier. Each base was equipped with planet-killing weapons and the most advanced detection systems in Yorthian space. "We're not just keeping them in," Admiral Ketharal announced during the dedication ceremony for the largest base. "We're making sure they know we're watching. If they ever find a way to break their cage, we'll be ready." The bases were marvels of military engineering, thousands of warships, millions of soldiers, weapons that could glass entire planets. The Yorthians were so proud of their new fortresses that they invited other council species to tour them. "This is how you handle a dangerous species," Admiral Ketharal told his visitors. Complete containment backed by overwhelming force. The humans will never threaten the galaxy again. But if the Admiral had looked more carefully at his sensor readings, he might have noticed something disturbing. The quarantine barrier wasn't keeping the humans trapped inside, it was keeping everyone else locked outside. Deep in the classified archives of the Andorian Collective, automated monitoring systems detected something that made their quantum computers freeze in terror. Space-time itself was being bent and twisted inside the quarantine zone. Gravitational waves that shouldn't exist rippled outward from the human solar system. Energy readings that broke every known law of physics. The Andorian Collective was a machine-intelligent species, artificial beings who thought in pure mathematics and logic. They had no emotions, no prejudices, no political agenda. They simply processed data and reached logical conclusions, and their conclusion was terrifying. Whatever the humans were doing inside their quarantine, it was beyond anything the galaxy had ever seen. The energy signatures suggested technology that was advancing at an impossible rate. Construction projects that could only be described as stellar engineering. Weapons development that made their own military look like children playing with sticks. But when they tried to share this data with the Council, they were ignored. The organic species couldn't understand the mathematical proofs. The political implications were too frightening to accept. It was easier to believe their sensors were malfunctioning. As the third year of quarantine ended, Intelligence Director Vashati made one final attempt to warn the Council. She stood before the assembled delegates with charts and graphs showing every anomaly, every disappearance, every impossible reading from the quarantine zone. "The humans are not dying," she said, her voice echoing through the great chamber. "They're growing stronger. We need to investigate before it's too late." High Arbiter Zekthal looked down at her with the same cold expression he had worn when condemning humanity. "Director Vashati," he said slowly, "your obsession with the humans has clouded your judgment. They are contained. They are isolated. They pose no threat to anyone. I suggest you focus your talents on more pressing matters." The other delegates murmured their agreement. The human problem was solved. Why waste time worrying about ghosts and shadows? Vashati left the chamber knowing she had failed. The Council would not listen. They were so confident in their victory that they couldn't see the signs of approaching disaster. That night, she sent a private message to her closest allies. "Prepare for the worst. The storm is coming and we're not ready." She was right. But even her worst nightmares couldn't prepare the galaxy for what was about to emerge from behind the quarantine barriers. The first sign that something terrible was about to happen came from the Andromedans. They were the machine intelligence species that had stayed neutral during humanity's trial, caring only about data and logic. Their deep space sensors were the most advanced in the galaxy, capable of detecting changes in space-time itself. At exactly 1432 Galactic Standard Time on a Tuesday, every Andromedan sensor array in 3 sectors screamed warnings at the same moment. Something massive was happening inside the human quarantine zone. Something that made their quantum processors calculate probabilities that should have been impossible. Emergency alerts flashed across their networks. Priority signals went out to every major government in the galaxy. The mathematical proofs were undeniable. Space-time around Earth's solar system was being torn apart and rebuilt according to new rules. But the organic species couldn't understand the warnings. The math was too complex, the implications too frightening. Most governments filed the alerts away as malfunctions or ignored them completely. High Arbiter Zekthal was in his private chambers when his communication system activated without permission. The holographic display showed an Andromedan representative, a shifting pattern of light and mathematics that hurt to look at directly. "High Arbiter," the Andromedan said, its voice sounding like equations being solved at light speed. "You must evacuate all Council worlds immediately. The humans are about to—" The transmission cut off abruptly. Then, across the galaxy, Every monitoring station watching the human quarantine zone went silent at exactly the same moment. The quarantine barrier didn't explode or shatter or fade away slowly. It simply ceased to exist, as if it had never been built in the first place. 3 years of the most advanced containment technology the galaxy had ever created just stopped. What the long-range sensors revealed next made seasoned military officers weep and scientists question the laws of reality itself. Earth's sun was completely enclosed in a sphere of artificial structures. Hundreds of thousands of massive panels and collectors formed a perfect shell around the star, capturing every photon of energy it produced. The construction was so precise, so perfectly engineered, that it looked like it had grown there naturally. But that was just the beginning. The asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter had been completely transformed into the largest shipyard complex ever imagined. Structures stretched across billions of kilometers, each one the size of a small moon. Construction facilities that could build vessels larger than most space stations worked around the clock, assembling ships according to designs that no council engineer could comprehend. Mars itself had been turned into a fortress world. Its surface was covered with defensive installations that made the Council's most advanced weapons look like toys. Energy shields the size of continents flickered around the planet. Orbital platforms bristled with weapons that seemed to bend. Light around themselves, Jupiter's moons had become factory worlds, their surfaces crawling with automated construction systems that built technologies using principles that shouldn't exist. The gas giant itself pulsed with artificial energy, as if the humans had found a way to turn the entire planet into a power source. And the ships. By all the gods of all the species, the ships. They emerged from the construction yards like nightmares, made of metal and energy. Vessels that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions at once, their hulls shifting and flowing like living things. Ships the size of moons that moved through space as easily as a fish swimming through water. The designs made no sense. They had no visible engines, no apparent weapons, no recognizable life support systems. They looked more like works of art than military vessels, beautiful and terrifying at the same time. Admiral Kethrall of the Yorthian Border Patrol watched from his flagship as the human fleet approached his carefully constructed defensive line. 3 military bases, 10,000 warships, weapons that could destroy planets, the pride of Yorthian military engineering. All ships, prepare for battle, he ordered, his voice steady despite the fear growing in his chest. We'll show these humans what happens when they break quarantine. His weapons officers targeted the lead human vessel, a sleek construction that seemed to absorb light instead of reflecting it. Energy readings showed it was completely unarmed. No missile tubes, no beam weapons, no defensive shields. Fire! Admiral Kethrall commanded. 1,000 plasma cannons fired at once, enough destructive force to crack a planet's crust. The beams reached the human ship and passed right through it, as if it wasn't really there. The human vessel didn't dodge or raise shields. It simply existed in a way that made normal physics irrelevant. The attacks couldn't touch it because it was operating according to different rules. Then Admiral Sarah Chen's voice filled every communication system in the Yorthian fleet, despite the fact that their channels were supposed to be secure. "Hello, Admiral Kethrall," she said, her voice calm and friendly. "Do you remember me? I stood trial before your council 3 years ago. They found us unworthy of galactic civilization." The Admiral's blood ran cold. He recognized that voice from the recordings of humanity's trial. But it couldn't be the same person. The voice carried undertones that suggested technologies beyond imagination. "We accepted your judgment," Sarah continued, and now her voice seemed to come from everywhere at once. The walls, the air, the thoughts in the Admiral's head. "You declared us unfit for civilized society, so we stopped being civilized." The lead human ship finally acted. It didn't fire weapons or deploy missiles. It simply looked at the Admiral's flagship with sensors that could see through dimensions, and the flagship ceased to exist. Not destroyed, erased. One moment it was there, a massive dreadnought carrying 50,000 crew members. The next moment, there was only empty space. No explosion, no debris, no trace that it had ever existed. The rest of the Yorthian fleet panicked. Ships tried to flee, but space around them had become strange and hostile. Their engines wouldn't work properly. Their navigation systems couldn't figure out which direction was which. Reality itself seemed to be working against them. One by one, the Yorthian vessels simply vanished. The humans didn't seem to be destroying them. They were editing them out of existence, like deleting words from a document. Within minutes, the most powerful military force in Yorthian space was gone. 3 bases, 10,000 ships, millions of soldiers, all erased as if they had never been built. But Admiral Kethral was not among the vanished. He found himself alone on a small escape pod, floating in space where his fleet used to be. His communication systems were still working, and Sarah Chen's voice filled his helmet once again. "Tell your council what you've seen here," she said. "Tell them that humanity has returned. Tell them we've become everything they feared we could be, and more than they ever imagined possible." The escape pod's engines activated without his input, pushing him toward the nearest Yorthian world. He was being sent home to deliver a message. The old quarantine kept us contained. Sarah's voice followed him as he fled. But it also gave us 3 years to prepare, 3 years to evolve, 3 years to become something that makes our old selves look like children playing with sticks and stones. As Admiral Kethral's pod jumped to hyperspace, he caught one last glimpse of the human fleet. There were thousands of ships now, emerging from construction yards that stretched across multiple solar systems. Each one was a masterpiece of engineering that broke every rule the galaxy thought it knew. The Galactic Council wanted to judge. "Us," Sarah Chen said, her final words echoing in the Admiral's mind as he raced toward home with his terrible news. "Now it's our turn to judge them." Behind him, the human fleet began to move, not toward any single world, but in all directions at once, spreading across the galaxy like a tide of nightmares and miracles. The galaxy was about to learn what happened when you pushed humanity too far, and there would be no mercy for those who had chosen to be enemies instead of friends. What followed across the galaxy was not a war in any traditional sense. Wars had battles, strategies, victories, and defeats. What humanity brought was something entirely different, a systematic dismantling of everything the Galactic Council represented. The human ships moved through space like ghosts made of metal and energy. They appeared without warning in orbit around the most important council worlds, hanging in the sky like mechanical angels of judgment. No alarms sounded because the ships existed outside normal space-time. Defensive systems couldn't target what they couldn't properly detect. On Yorthos Prime, the capital world of the Yorthian hegemony, High Arbiter Zekthal stood on his palace balcony, watching humanity's fleet arrange itself above his city. The ships were beautiful in a terrifying way. Smooth curves that seemed to flow like liquid metal, surfaces that bent light in impossible directions, engines that created rainbows in space. "How many ships?" he asked his military advisor, though his voice came out as barely a whisper. We can't count them," the advisor replied, his hands shaking as he tried to read his instruments. "The sensors show different numbers every time we look. Sometimes 12 ships, sometimes 12,000. It's like they exist in multiple dimensions at once." Zekthal had spent his entire life believing in the superiority of Yorthian technology and military might. His people had conquered dozens of worlds, built the greatest space fleet in known galactic history, created weapons that could crack planets like eggs. All of it was useless now. The largest human ship descended through the atmosphere like a falling star, but it made no sound and created no heat. When it landed in the palace courtyard, Zekthal was shocked to see that it was no bigger than a normal transport vessel. How could something so small carry the power to erase entire fleets? The airlock opened, and 3 humans stepped out. They looked like the humans from the old records. 2 arms, 2 legs, a head with hair and eyes. But something was different. They moved too smoothly, as if gravity didn't affect them the same way. Their eyes held depths that suggested they could see through time itself. The woman in the center was familiar. Ambassador Sarah Chen, who had stood trial 3 years ago. But she had been changed, enhanced, evolved into something that was still human, but somehow more than human. "High Arbiter Zekthal," she said, and her voice carried harmonics that made the air itself sing. "Do you remember me? I stood in your council chamber while you pronounced humanity's death sentence." Zekthal tried to speak, but found his throat too dry. Sarah Chen smiled, but it wasn't a kind expression. It was the smile of a teacher about to deliver a very hard lesson. "You had a choice 3 years ago," she continued, walking across the courtyard toward him. "Stand with us, stand aside, or stand against us. You chose to be our enemy. Now you get to learn what that means." Behind her, more humans emerged from impossible ships that had appeared in the courtyard without landing. These weren't the scared, desperate people who had been exiled from galactic civilization. These were beings who had transcended every limitation that had once defined their species. "We're not here to conquer your world," Sarah said, stopping just close enough that Zekthal could see the energy patterns flowing beneath her skin. "Conquest implies we want to rule you. We don't. We're here to teach you a lesson about consequences." What happened next on Yorthos Prime was repeated across every major council world. The humans didn't destroy cities or slaughter populations. Instead, they systematically dismantled every piece of technology more advanced than basic agriculture. Military bases simply ceased to exist. Starships in orbit were edited out of reality. Communication networks went dark. Industrial complexes transformed into empty fields where grass began to grow. The humans were surgically removing every trace of advanced civilization, leaving behind populations that could survive but could never again threaten their neighbors. "You judged us unworthy of civilization," Sarah explained to the gathered Yorthian. Leadership, as her people's work, continued around them. "So we're returning the favor. Your species will have the chance to grow up again, to learn wisdom instead of just accumulating power. Maybe next time, you'll choose differently." The process was precise and terrifyingly efficient. Human teams moved through each world with technologies that made local security forces irrelevant. They identified every weapon, every computer system, every piece of equipment that could be used for space travel or long-range communication. None of it was destroyed in the traditional sense. The humans simply reached into the quantum structure of matter and convinced it to become something else. Plasma cannons became flowering trees. Starship engines turned into sculptures that sang in the wind. Nuclear weapons transformed into playgrounds, where children could safely play. On Centauri Prime, Intelligence Director Vashati watched from her office window as human ships reshaped her world's greatest military academy into a garden filled with species that had been extinct for 1,000 years. The precision was breathtaking. Every plant was placed exactly where it would thrive, every pathway designed for maximum beauty and harmony. "They're not just taking our weapons," she told her staff, her voice filled with wonder and terror. "They're showing us what we could have built instead. All the resources we spent on ways to kill, they're turning into ways to create life." A knock on her door interrupted her thoughts. When she opened it, she found a human woman standing in the hallway. This one looked younger than Sarah Chen, with bright eyes and a smile that seemed genuinely friendly. "Director Vashati?" the woman asked. "My name is Dr. Lisa Park. I wanted to thank you for trying to warn the council. Your reports were accurate. We were preparing something beyond their imagination." Vashti stared at the human, noting how she seemed to exist slightly outside normal space-time. "What are you going to do to my people?" Nothing, Dr. Park replied. Your species spoke against humanity's exile. You tried to warn the council when they wouldn't listen. You showed wisdom and courage when most others showed only fear and prejudice. Your worlds will be protected, not punished. Protected from what? Dr. Park's smile faded slightly. From the chaos that's coming. When you remove advanced technology from a galactic civilization overnight, the economic and political systems collapse. There will be wars, famines, population movements, desperate attempts to reclaim lost power. We're not cruel. We won't leave innocent populations to suffer for their leaders' mistakes. Through the window, Vashti could see more human ships arriving in orbit. These were different from the warships, sleeker, more elegant, filled with equipment that hummed with beneficial energy. Medical ships, Dr. Park explained, following her gaze. Agricultural vessels, disaster relief units. We're not just taking away the tools of war. We're providing the tools of peace. Clean energy that can't be weaponized. Medical technology that heals instead of harms. Agricultural systems that can feed populations without destroying ecosystems. The irony was overwhelming. The species the Council had condemned as violent and destructive was now saving billions of lives across the galaxy. But not every world received such mercy. On the Yorthian colony worlds where Admiral Kethral's expansion fleets had established bases, the human response was different. These worlds had been built specifically to threaten humanity, armed with weapons designed to destroy Earth if the quarantine ever failed. The humans didn't harm the colonists, but they didn't offer help either. The military infrastructure vanished, leaving behind populations that would have to learn to survive on their own. It was a harder lesson, but not a cruel one. Every choice has consequences, Sarah Chen explained in her final transmission to the scattered council governments. You chose to be our enemies when you could have been our friends. Now you get to experience what that choice really cost you. The transformation took only 6 months. 6 months to reduce the mighty Galactic Council from a collection of star-spanning empires to a scattering of individual worlds struggling to survive without their advanced technology. But as the humans had promised, it wasn't extinction. It was education. And for the first time in galactic history, there was no war anywhere in known space. Not because peace had been negotiated, but because no one had the tools to fight anymore. The galaxy was learning what true power looked like. Not the ability to destroy, but the wisdom to know when destruction was necessary and when mercy was stronger than vengeance. 5 years after the Great Dismantling, the galaxy was a very different place. The old trade routes had gone silent, the Grand Council chambers stood empty, and most species had retreated to their homeworlds to rebuild their shattered civilizations. But something new was growing in the darkness. It started with signals from Earth, not threats or demands, but invitations. Clean, clear transmissions in dozens of languages, offering help to any species that wanted to rebuild their world in a better way. To all who hear this message, the broadcasts began, humanity extends an offer of friendship and cooperation. We have learned much during our exile, and we want to share what we've discovered. Not as conquerors or rulers, but as partners in creating something better than what came before. The first species to respond was the Andromedans. Their machine. Intelligence had no ego to wound, no pride to overcome. They simply calculated that cooperation with humanity offered the best probability of survival and growth. Dr. Lisa Park met the Andromedan delegation at a space station orbiting Earth's moon. The station itself was a work of art. Flowing curves and crystalline structures that seemed to grow like living things. Inside, the artificial gravity was perfect. The air was sweet with the scent of flowers, and every surface hummed with barely contained energy. We want to understand, the lead Andromedan said, its form shifting between mathematical equations and geometric patterns. Your technology operates according to principles we cannot compute. How did you advance so quickly?" Lisa smiled, gesturing toward a window that showed Earth in all its transformed glory. The planet was covered with cities that looked more like gardens, orbital rings that sparkled like jewelry, and structures that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. "We had 3 years of perfect isolation," she explained. "No distractions, no political considerations, no need to worry about what other species might think. We could finally focus on becoming what we were meant to be." "And what were you meant to be?" "Better," Lisa said simply. "Better than we were, better than anyone expected, better than the galaxy thought possible. The Council's punishment became our greatest gift." The partnership with the Andromedans led to breakthroughs that made both species stronger. Human creativity combined with Andromedan logic produced technologies that seemed like magic to the rest of the galaxy. Ships that could travel between stars in minutes instead of months, energy systems that could power entire worlds without fuel, medical treatments that could cure any disease and extend life indefinitely. Other species began to take notice. The first flesh and blood species to approach humanity was the Kepler Collective, a group of aquatic beings who had remained neutral during humanity's trial. Their representative, Admiral Reeftel, arrived at the lunar station in a small diplomatic vessel. "We watched what you did to the Council worlds," he said during his first meeting with Sarah Chen. "We expected violence and revenge. Instead, you showed restraint and wisdom. Our people want to understand how this is possible." Sarah had changed even more in the years since the dismantling. Her appearance was still recognizably human, but she moved with the fluid grace of someone who existed, partially outside normal physics. When she spoke, her words carried harmonies that made listeners feel they were hearing truth itself. "Revenge would have been easy," she told Admiral Reeftel. "Destruction is simple. Any species with enough power can break things. But building something better requires wisdom, patience, and cooperation. We learned those lessons during our exile." "What kind of cooperation?" Sarah gestured toward the observation deck, where Andromedan mathematicians worked alongside human engineers on projects that glowed with impossible energies. "The kind where every species contributes their unique gifts without losing what makes them special. The Council's old system ranked species in hierarchies: who was more advanced, who was more powerful, who deserved to rule others. We're offering something different." The Kepler Collective became humanity's second partner, contributing their mastery of fluid dynamics and underwater construction to projects that spanned multiple star systems. Their cities beneath alien oceans became marvels of engineering that provided resources and knowledge to the growing alliance, but not every species was ready to accept humanity's new order. On Yorthos Prime, High Arbiter Zekthal spent his days in what had once been his palace's war room, now converted into a simple meeting hall where local leaders discussed farming schedules and trade agreements. The reduction in circumstances burned at his pride like acid. "They humiliated us," he told the few supporters who still visited him. "Made us look weak and primitive in front of the entire galaxy. We cannot let this stand." His followers nodded, but they were old and few. Most Yorthians had adapted to their new circumstances, finding that life without constant warfare was actually more pleasant than they had expected. But Zekthal could not let go of the old ways. "We will rebuild," he declared. "Find new allies among the species that still remember the old order. Create weapons that can pierce their defenses. Show the galaxy that the Yorthian hegemony is not dead." What he didn't know was that every word he spoke was being monitored by systems he couldn't detect. Humanity had not left the galaxy unguarded. They simply used protection methods that worked through kindness rather than fear. When Zekthal's agents made contact with other disgruntled council remnants, their meetings were observed. When they tried to acquire weapons or technology, they found only merchants selling farm equipment and medical supplies. When they attempted to build alliances, they discovered that most species were too busy rebuilding their worlds to worry about old grudges. The final blow came when Zekthal tried to access hidden weapon caches that the Yorthian military had supposedly placed on dozens of worlds before the dismantling. Every cache was empty, but not looted, transformed. Where plasma cannons should have been stored, they found community centers. Where nuclear weapons had been hidden, they discovered schools and hospitals. They knew, Zekthal whispered when he realized the truth. They knew everything we had planned, everything we had built, everything we thought we had hidden. They let us play our games while they quietly saved us from ourselves. The last of his supporters drifted away, choosing to focus on their families and communities rather than impossible dreams of revenge. Zekthal found himself alone in his converted palace, an old warrior whose war had been ended not by defeat, but by irrelevance. It was then that Sarah Chen came to visit him. She arrived without fanfare, walking through his front door as if force fields and security systems didn't exist. She looked older now, more mature. But her eyes still held the same determination that had faced down the entire Galactic Council years before. "Hello, Zekthal," she said, settling into a chair across from his desk. "You've been busy trying to restart the old conflicts." He glared at her with all the hatred he could muster. "You destroyed everything my people built, everything we accomplished across 1,000 years of expansion and growth." "No," Sarah replied calmly. "We saved your people from the path you were leading them down. Left alone, the Yorthian hegemony would have eventually collapsed under the weight of its own aggression. Your economy was based entirely on conquest and exploitation. That kind of system always destroys itself eventually. You had no right to make that choice for us." Sarah's expression grew sad. "You made the choice for everyone when you condemned humanity to isolation. Every action has consequences, Zekthal. You chose to be our enemy. We chose to respond with wisdom instead of wrath." She stood up, moving toward the window that looked out over the transformed capital city. Where once military parades had marched through streets designed for intimidation, children now played in parks filled with flowers from dozens of worlds. "Your people are happier now," she observed. "They live longer, healthier lives. They don't fear that their children will die in distant wars. They've discovered art, music, literature, things that were suppressed under the old military culture. They've become weak," Zekthal spat. "They've become wise," Sarah corrected. "There's a difference. Strength that serves no purpose beyond domination isn't strength at all. It's just violence dressed up in fancy uniforms." She turned back to face him, and for a moment, Zekthal saw something that made his blood run cold. Behind her human appearance, behind the gentle words and patient explanations, was power beyond imagination. Power that could reshape reality with a thought. That could erase entire fleets from existence. That could judge the worthiness of entire civilizations. "I'm offering you one final choice," Sarah said. "You can spend your remaining years nursing old grudges and impossible dreams of revenge. Or you can learn what your people have learned, that there are better ways to live than the ones you've always known." Zekthal sat in silence for a long time, staring at the woman who had become, the symbol of everything he had lost. Finally, he asked the question that had haunted him for years. What would have happened if we had chosen differently? If the Council had welcomed humanity instead of condemning them? Sarah smiled, and for the first time, it was a truly happy expression. "You would have been our partners in becoming something wonderful, the